thought I might do a quick video on how to measure carts because it tends to be a lot of confusion as to how all these things are figured out and how they're supposed to fit your horse. We'll start off basically with, there are several measurements that you can do on your horse to find out what size cart you need, and there's also several things you can measure on a cart to find out what replacement part you need. The first and the most common is, how do I measure the length of my shafts? It's very simple. You have a single tree on top of your crossbar, and from the face of that crossbar you put your tape down and you run all the way forward to the tip. This cart has 48-inch shafts measured from the face of the crossbar that the single tree sits on all the way across. When you're measuring for the size single tree that you need, if you have to replace it, it's measured from the end to end, not including the hooks on this type of single tree. And this is a 20-inch single tree, so you don't add the hooks into that measurement. It's just from the collar to collar. If it's a spade type that's on your show carts, that's measured end to end. Another measurement that we need to know, a lot of times people come in, they want replacement tires or wheels for their carts, and they don't know the hub size, they don't know the size of the axle, and they're not sure of the tire size. All of your tires are going to be marked on the actual edge of the tire. It'll tell you 26 by whatever. If you're not sure, you can't see it, or it's been worn off, one thing you got to remember is not the rim size. In other words, the measurement of the tire is not going to be the here to here. The inside measure of the tire is actually the whole entire outside edge. So this tire is 26 inches, and that's what it measures all the way across, including the tire. So don't measure your rim to get your tire size. You actually measure the outside edge of the tire. To figure out what you want for a hub, you can take this, the hub is this part here that all the spokes are attached to, and it's important to know the depth of that hub. So we look down to the edge of the bearing, and it's 6 inches wide. And that's going to play a big part in whether it's going to fit. Some carts like this have no fenders or forks, so it just needs to slide on, but the axle is only turned so many inches in. So you need to know the depth that the current tire or wheel that you have on there will accept. If you're putting a cart together from parts and you just don't know what size it's going to be, you can give us a measurement from the last thread to where it flares out into a square stock for your axle, and that will tell us what hub size you're going to need. Then additionally, these wheels, like these bike wheels like this, come with snap bearings. These bearings actually just pop right out, and we can replace them with different sizes to accommodate different size axles. The norm is a 3/4 inch, and you just measure the diameter right across that hole right there. Or if it's on the cart, you can actually measure the end of the axle that pokes out from the edge of the cart. But 3/4 is standard, but they also come in 5/8, and they come in 1/2 inch for some of the really narrow carts. How do you determine what size shafts your horse is going to take? Well, quite simply, it's measuring the horse from the tip of his point of his shoulder straight across to where he ends, almost like if you had two boards like this and you stuck him in the middle from his chest to his fanny, and you measure that distance. Then you have to add in the personal preference. The point of the shoulder and the point of your shaft, that's where they start. This never goes beyond the edge of the horse, so this end of the shaft here stays at the point of the shoulder. Then you measure back, and let's say your Mini, in this particular case, I'm working with a Mini. This is a 48-inch shaft, and the Mini measures 38 inches long. So from the point of his shoulder to the end of his body is 38 inches. That allows me for a 10-inch gap between the back of his tail and my single tree. This is where the personal preference gap is. A lot of people, with the smaller the horse, the closer it is. My rule of thumb, when I recommend for people, is the lower the seat, the further away you want the horse. And that's to give you that kind of kicking room. Generally, just to give you a generalization, a big tall road cart that has tall wheels and it sits right up high for a Morgan the shaft size is generally 72 to 74 inches long. We take a show cart, like a Gerald show cart or a Houghton, and set it down on low wire wheels and the seats down here. That same Morgan's going to take an 88-inch shaft because we want them a little further away. The higher up the seat, the more room there is for the legs to go underneath, so we don't need to have as long a shaft. There also becomes the personal preference thing where people, what their comfort zone is. We have a group of people who want their horse to sit right on that circle bar, and they only want 6 inches between their fanny and that bar to keep their feet and legs all underneath them. That's their personal preference. So we would take this 38-inch mini and add 6 inches, because that's all they want, of a gap, and that gives us our shaft size. So we know that we want something for, less than 48 inches because they only want a 6-inch gap. We also have people on the other end of the spectrum who want 2 feet between the back of their horse and the front of their cart. And so again, we would measure the length of the horse, add the personal preference gap, and that gives us the total shaft length. The width should be measured across the narrow part here where it turns in. We just measure it straight across, inside to inside. And again, we take the horse's chest, we put our hands like this on the outside edge, 1 inch apart, and measure straight across. What's the distance between those 2 hands? 1 inch off the shoulder on each side. Because that doesn't, a lot of people get confused. They think, my horse has a big belly, he'll never fit in there. These don't fit on the belly. They fit on the shoulders, which generally don't change a lot in weight. So we know how to measure lengthwise. Well, how do we determine where do we measure to get this thing to fit height-wise? Most minis are going to fit in a 48-inch shaft, 20-inch wheel. Very, very simple. The really small ones, we have to get shorter shafts, but we stay with a 20-inch wheel. The B-size minis will go with a 52-inch shaft, and generally we'll stay with a 20-inch wheel unless we start getting up into the small pony. We start getting the small pony, then we're going to bring it up to the 24 or the 26-inch wheel, because generally we'd like to see this shaft fairly level with the ground. So here to the ground and here to the ground would be about the same. Now you do have adjustments on your harness tugs. You can adjust those up and down to gain some leveling on the shafts. But when we start getting into the taller horses with wooden wheels, and the wooden wheels come in 2-inch increments, we can, up and down, up and down. So how do we figure where that wheel height is going to have to be? We're going to take a measurement from right straight across the middle of the shoulder. So if the horse's shoulder is right here, we're going to put our tape right on that shoulder where that shaft is going to fit, right in the middle of his shoulder, right here. I'm going to go from there to the ground. That's going to give us the height that we need to get, and your cart manufacturer or your dealer can help you determine the wheel size by that height measurement, because that's where a straight shaft like this is going to lay. If you have a gig shaft that has a big whoop-de-doo in the front, you're going to measure from the top of the whoop-de-doo where it's going to lay in the tugs, because those shafts tend to curl up and then come down a little bit lower. But that height right in the middle of the shoulder to the ground is going to help us determine what size wheels you're going to take. When you're measuring for wooden wheels or rubber wheels like these, remember your measurement on these includes the tire, and on a wooden wheel it does not include the rubber. It's just the wooden part. So very simply, shaft length, there's your gap. That tells you whether you want how far away the back of your horse is. You decide that. Measure your horse, add those 2 things together. That gives you shaft length. You know now how to measure for tires and single trees, and there's really not a whole lot else that you want to be aware of as far as measurements go, other than the seat width, which sometimes people want a little bit wider seat or maybe a little more narrow seat. And again, it's a straight up measurement. You take your seat and you just run it right across here, and you say, this is how long I want it. You can have it extend out a little bit over the edge. When you're ordering a cart, if you're not entirely sure, just go with what's standard. That's the safest bet. And that's it. That's how you measure carts.